This is the EWN Podcast Network.
Welcome to Prime Spark, the podcast that brings you conversations that inspire, celebrate, and empower women over 55. The second women's revolution is here, and it is time for us to fuel a spark that will ignite your way forward, illuminate your path, and reflect your gifts in the world. Now, here is your host for Prime Spark, Sarah Hart.
Hi, and welcome to Prime Spark. I'm Sarah Hart, and I'm so happy you're here with us. Prime Spark is designed for women over 55 or close to help us all live our happiest, most fulfilling lives now and in the future. The mission of Prime Spark is to change the way our society sees and treats older women. That's a big mission, which only means we all need to be involved and we need to get started now. And today I have the great pleasure of talking with Susan Douglas, a woman whose work and writing I greatly admire. Susan J. Douglas is a professor at the University of Michigan. She is the author of many books, including the acclaimed In Our Prime, How Older Women Are Reinventing the Road Ahead, and Editor's Choice Staff Picks by the New York Times. The Rise of Enlightened Sexism, How Pop Culture Took Us from Girl Power to Girls Gone Wild. The Mommy Myth, the Idealization of Motherhood and How It Undermines Women. Where the Girls Are, Growing Up Female with the Mass Media, and many more. She has lectured at colleges and universities around the country and has written for the New York Times, The Nation, The Village Voice, Ms., The Washington Post, TV Guide, and was media critic for The Progressive from 1992 to 1998. She can be found frequently on TV and radio, including The Today Show, the CBS Early Show, The Oprah Winfrey Show, NPR's Fresh Air Weekend Edition, and various radio talk shows around the country. Where the Girls Are was widely praised and chosen as one of the top 10 books of 1994 by National Public Radio, Entertainment Weekly, and the McLaughlin Group. She served on the board of the George Foster Peabody Awards from 2005 to 2010, and in 2010 was selected as chair of the board. She is a 2009 recipient of the Leonardo da Vinci Prize, the highest honor given by the Society for the History of Technology to an individual who has greatly contributed to the history of technology through research, teaching, publication, and other activities. Welcome, Susan. I'm so happy you're here today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Let's just get started by my asking you, do you experience getting older? And if so, what is that experience? And if not, why is it that you think you don't?
You know, I do experience it and I don't. It's, it's a kind of a contradictory feeling. I think like many women of our age, if we're lucky enough to be healthy, we typically feel 15 to 20 years younger than we are. When I had a recent birthday and somebody asked me how old I was, it was like odd to say it because I literally felt 20 years younger, I'm still working, I'm still writing, I'm a very active person, but, there are aches and pains. There are desperately sad losses of people you've known for 40 and 50 years. So I find myself kind of whipsawed between feeling older and not feeling older.
That is a wonderful way to put it, Susan. I have I've asked, I don't know, over 100 women now that question. And I need to go back and count, but I'll bet you at least 90% of the women I've asked that question say something like you've just said. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I have some aches and pains. I can't do in the same way everything I did, but I may be doing other things. But other than that, I feel more of who I am. I don't feel my age. So, in different kinds of ways, we all are saying the same thing. And it's just time for our society to catch up on that realization that this is who we are.
Well, I think some of the reason that we say we don't feel our age is because there are such outdated, antiquated notions of what it means to be an older person and an older woman. And obviously, baby boom women and those who preceded them a little bit and those who were following them generationally, we are the healthiest generation of older women ever. And so it's not surprising that we don't see ourselves as like Granny and the Beverly Hillbillies, we don't see ourselves as these, the sign, for elderly people crossing where there are two hunched over people with a cane. These are just such antiquated, depictions and stereotypes of what older people are like. And so, of course, we don't want to conform to those stereotypes, but they don't resonate with us.
They don't depict who we are.
Exactly.
They just don't. I don't know. I'm sure you've seen this on LinkedIn recently. There was an outrage article about the 100 days that young little kids at school go dressed up as old people. Have you seen those pictures?
No, I have not.
It is wonderful. It might, I'm not going to say who it was because I'm not sure who it was, but we didn't do this when I was in school, but apparently on the 100th day of something, maybe when the 100th day that the kid is in school or something, I don't know. They're invited to come dressed as a 100-year-old or as an old person. And they all come with canes and walkers. And so we're inculcating grade school kids with what it means to be older.
Absolutely. And we've been doing it, whether through, school events like that, we've been doing it for decades through the media.
Yes.
Decades.
Yes. Speaking of the media, I have one of the favorite chapters in your wonderful book, In Our Prime. If you don't have this book, my women friends out there, you need to go get it. It is a magnificent book. And one of the chapters that I find both very funny and very infuriating is the aging industrial complex. Could you explain what you mean by that and then talk about it a bit?
Yeah, it's called the anti-aging industrial complex, and it refers to spas, cosmetic surgery procedures, the 8 trillion cosmetic, treatments and everything out there, all of which are designed to make us feel phobic about aging. And we are told repeatedly that the one thing we must do about aging is defy it, as if you can defy an ineluctable biological process that begins from the moment you're born. And I just, I have gone to Sephora many, many times with my adult daughter. And yes, we have, pre-pandemic, dropped the equivalent of a car payment there. And, there are the bleachers and bleachers of all of these products calling out to you, buy me, I'll make you look 10 years younger, yada, 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 and none of them do. And I just wanted to take it on because on the one hand, I think like many women, maybe most women, I'm a sucker for stuff like that. I'm a sucker for some claim that some skin cream is going to make my skin feel better, look better. And on the other hand, I know completely that none of this stuff works. I mean, the best anti-aging thing is to start putting sunscreen on your face, when you're young. Now, when I was young, sunscreen was Johnson's baby oil. So, which is like the worst thing you could do.
With iodine.
With iodine, absolutely. Yeah, you can't forget the iodine. And so I began to do some research on this because I found some of the claims of some of the ingredients that they put in, like licorice allegedly, halts the advance of wrinkles, or there's something that is nicknamed vomit fruit that supposedly, if it's in, some anti-aging product, it will, forestall the aging process. And I just had fun going through it because it was like these companies were on a, horticultural hunt for like the latest thing they could claim would, stop aging. And of course, then I, began to do some research on this. And of course, none of this stuff works. And various of these claims by certain companies like L'Oreal, for example, have been yanked before the FTC and say, yank those ads because you can't back them up. Some of them are saying, oh, we'll genetically modify your skin. Well, that's making a scientific claim that can't be backed up. So I did have a lot of fun writing it and kind of cruising the shelves at Sephora and jotting down which ones claimed which, the skins of red grapes would do X. And so I had fun with it, but it also is infuriating, Sarah. You're totally right, because, we're being urged to spend hundreds of dollars, a month on some of this stuff. I mean, there's some little tiny jar of something that's 0.002 ounces selling for $78 or $125. And, really when Nivea, I think, will probably do the trick.
Or I think my mother used Pond's.
Pond's, absolutely. I used to use Pond's in the olden days. You talk to a dermatologist and they're like, give me a break. They're like, get CeraVe or get Nivea, over the counter CVS, $4.99. Right. There's a decimal point between the 4 and the 9.
Yes, that's important in this. Well, I loved it because, we can, you're right in what you said, that we can all see ourselves in this. And what I find fascinating is that I am a sucker some of the time for it. And I will find myself reading about something and then going to see if I can find it, or going on Amazon, seeing if they sell it on Amazon, so I don't have to buy it through an internet Facebook ad that I don't trust or whatever. And I know my logical mind knows this is total crap, and this is a waste of my money. But the messages we've gotten are so strong that you must try to fight your wrinkles. Do anything you can to do that. And I can think of that logically as being, whoever said I worked hard for these wrinkles, it's the strength of the messages we've gotten. And it's distressing.
Sarah, just think about how brilliant it is as a marketing strategy, right? You make people terrified of something they cannot avoid.
Right.
The only way you avoid it is something worse than getting older, right? And so you start developing a market. I know young women in their 20s and 30s who are like doing all this anti-aging stuff, beautiful, healthy young women. But it's you have an ever replenishing market of decades worth of women who have been made to feel not only terrified of aging, but also it's your fault. If you don't do something about it, you're not being disciplined. You're being lazy. You're not taking advantage of the latest technology, with these products that sound like they're a cross between something designed by NASA and an organic, botanist. So it's just a brilliant campaign. And of course it seduces us.
Right.
Of course it does.
Right.
But I have to tell you, after writing that chapter and then finishing the book, I was like, okay, that's it. Nivea, it is.
Good for you. So, I mean, we all know, again, in our logical minds, we all know, as somebody said, and I think it's brilliant, anti-aging is like anti-breathing. But how do we counteract those messages, Susan? I mean, they're ubiquitous. You look through any women's magazine, and it's changing a tiny bit, but mostly there are 20-something women who even they are airbrushed, and they look absolutely gorgeous. And that's what we're supposed to look like when we're 60, 70, 80. And that's just absurd.
Yeah, it is. And, of all of the isms out there, sexism, racism, ageism is the one thing that you can't escape. It can apply to everybody. However, it applies much more punishingly to women.
Yes.
And, to get back to something you just hinted at a minute ago, I do think we are at a turnstile moment where we are seeing more older women, not as many as we'd like, but we're seeing more older women in public office. We're seeing more older women in entertainment media. I mean, Judi Dench is still in movies.
Love Judi Dench.
Grace and Frankie, huge hit. Nancy Pelosi, 80 years old. Maxine Waters. We are seeing more older women in public life and on the screens of America. And while there are many women in journalism, particularly television journalism, who get forced out once they hit 50 or so, and they're replaced by some model-ready, gorgeous 30-year-old woman. And that is infuriating and deeply unfortunate. But we are seeing more older women hanging in there, as television reporters. So there is beginning to be some real pushback among famous women, but also everyday women who are refusing to be put out to pasture, insisting upon being public figures in their lives. Now, a lot of this, of course, was completely upended. Here's my advice to any author. Don't publish a book and have the launch date be the beginning of a global pandemic. Just my gratuitous advice. So, and we'll talk about this a little later on. I was really advocating in the book, at the end of the book, about the importance of older women and younger women getting together and comparing notes and talking about what matters to the different generations, because we do have our generationally different issues, but we also have powerfully overlapping and reinforcing issues as well. And I do think it's very important for older women like us to reassure younger women that getting older is not scary. It's actually, there's enormous amount of rewards to it, enormous amount of pleasures to being older. I mean, I find now, don't mess with me, I'm not 22 years old anymore where I care, and a lot of studies show that women in their 60s and 70s are actually happier than women in their 20s. We have incredibly fulfilling personal lives of family and friendship. Many of us have wonderful accomplishments that we relish and want to build upon. Many of us are active in our communities as volunteers, as workers. There are all kinds of pleasures and rewards that we need to assure younger women lie ahead for them, even if they might have bags under their eyes after a while,
Right. Which they will have, probably.
Which they will.
Yeah, Susan, talk about that, because one of my other favorite chapters is chapter 7, Lifespan Feminism, Bridge Groups, and the Road Ahead. Would you mind reading just a little bit at the beginning of that chapter? Because I think it's a wonderful chapter.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Today, women of a certain age feel ourselves to be at another turnstile moment. We're poised between outdated norms that seek to render us irrelevant, voiceless, and invisible, and our own widening rebellion against such strictures. We are rejecting acquiescence and inequality, and instead are claiming our right to be seen, heard, and respected in the world. So much in our media and culture tell us the main thing we should feel about being older is shame, especially because we are women and we are constantly judged over how we look. The media also erase from view women who cannot afford to personify the ideals of aspirational aging, buttressing the notion that most older women do not matter at all.
That I love. I love that. I love that. Would you talk a little about any of that you want, but particularly those bridge groups? Because I think that is new thinking, and I think that it is really exciting and a potential that any of us could do in our communities in one way or another.
So there are two terms that I've put in the book. One is lifespan feminism. And what I mean by that is feminism does not end when you are 50 years old. And we need to embrace and advance feminism from the time we're little girls until we go to the great rock concert in the sky. Feminism matters as much for women over 50 as it does for women under 50. There are overlapping issues, but also different issues. And, there's been a major war against older women. People don't think of it that way. They think, they're trying to cut, Medicare. They're trying to cut Social Security. It's against old people. Well, yeah, sure, it's against old people, but guess who lives longer? Guess who's more reliant on many of those programs? It's older women. So that's what I mean by lifespan feminism. Now, bridge clubs, and I am in a very privileged position because I'm a college professor. And so, I get to meet young people and work with young people all the time, and young women. And there's a powerful connection, between them and me and them and some of the older female professors on campus. They're starting out and they're scared and they're anxious. And what can I accomplish? And they look at me and my colleagues and they're like, oh, you've accomplished so much. How did you get there? And we know some of what their issues are, but we don't know all of them. They're growing up in a very different time. It's a very fragile time between climate change, and now this horrible war, anxieties about resources, anxieties about partisan divides in our country, anxieties about race and sexuality, all of there are powerful things affecting them that have affected us and do affect us as well. And then we have issues that primarily affect us. I think to strengthen feminism in this country to strengthen women's voices, we have to talk to each other and we have to build alliances. And again, during the pandemic, it was like, oh, great. I have this message in the book, and then you can't, everybody's locked down, but we're crawling out of it now. And, I think the initiative needs to come from older women, and it's really easy. Everybody knows somebody who is a woman who is in her 20s or 30s or 40s. It can be a child, it can be a niece, it can be a friend, of one of your adult children. It can be somebody, through a volunteer group or whatever. And I think, maybe two older women invite two younger women, and you go get a cup of coffee, or better yet, a glass of wine, and, talk to each other. What are the issues facing you as a younger woman? What are the issues facing you as an older woman? What do we have in common? What kind of organizations do we see out there that we can connect with? Often they can be local organizations, which are often more effective these days than national ones. But I do think that young women need and want to hear from us. And I think we need and want to hear from them.
Agree 100%. I love it. And I'm so sorry that came out right at the beginning of the pandemic. Christmas. So that was published in 2020, and now we're in 2022. Have you seen in those 2 years any positive movement or not? I mean, are we pretty much in the same place? Are things changing at all? What do you see?
Well, listen, the pandemic was very, very, very hard on people of color and women, and particularly caregiver women, mothers trying to, hold down jobs and watch their kids. It was a differentially impacting pandemic. It was also absolutely lethal for older people in, care centers and in nursing homes, where the response was slow. People are in very close, proximity to each other. But having said that, at the beginning of the pandemic, because there was this devastation of people in nursing homes and care centers, the initial impression was that the disease primarily affected older Americans. And there was a lot of ageist stuff out there, let them die, it was pretty awful. Of course, then as things evolved, we learned that this horrible disease affects people of all ages. And in fact, people who got this disease in their 30s and 40s, some of them have had incredibly, long-term COVID. So at the beginning of the pandemic, it seemed like, only older people suffer from this, who cares? Then once the vaccines came out, then there were these awful media depictions of older people, being the first in line to get the vaccine, hogging them up so that younger people couldn't get them. There was a terrible story in the New York Times, front page of the Times, about, all these older people are going out, they're going to restaurants, they're going out dancing, they're having a good time, while younger people, can't even get a vaccine, blaming older people. And then there was a Saturday night live skit called Boomers Get the Vax. If you haven't seen it, I commend it to your attention, and not for good reasons, but for bad reasons. And as I am a big fan of SNL, but SNL, Stephen Colbert, a bunch of these, I love Stephen Colbert as well, but there's a lot of ageist humor and ageist jokes out there. So the first part of my answer is things were pretty terrible during the pandemic. At the same time, there have been very important media exposés about the differential, unequal impact of this horrible disease on women, on mothers, on women of color, on vulnerable older women, not in care homes, but isolated, for whatever reason. And, whether we're going to be able to do anything about that, given the, arterial sclerosis of our, political system. But, and also we have begun to see older women. I especially see older women as commentators on MSNBC. Yeah. And as journalists and commentators. And they're not necessarily talking about what it's like to be an older woman. They're just, public affairs experts. So again, the turnstile, keeps pushing and pulling. And, we've got to push it towards more equity and visibility and equality for older women.
I find one of the really interesting things when, just a lot of what you just said, but one of the things recently I have been pointing out to some older people about how ageist our society is, and like with, for example, greeting cards that are funny, quote unquote. And so I talk about that and they look at me and they don't understand what I'm talking about some of the time. We are so ingrained with ageism that we don't even see it. And so I've said to them, we would not make racial comments like that anymore. We just wouldn't do it. We wouldn't even usually make sexist comments like that anymore, but we still make ageist comments. But it's on the horizon, but it is not here quite yet. And so Susan, what's ahead for you? What dreams have you not yet realized, and what's next now that we are hopefully coming out of the pandemic?
Well, I'm still enjoying my teaching, which I love very much. And it's interesting, I never used to teach about ageism in the media. I do our big introductory course. It's the history of the media up to the present. And, it's advertising, public relations, the news, all of this. And there's a whole section on media and identity. And so for years, I've done stuff on racism in the media, as well as anti-racism in the media, the images of women. Well, for the past, I don't know, 5 years maybe, I've done a whole lecture on ageism in the media. It blows my students away because they have never thought about it.
Right.
And at the end of the semester, they have to write a take-home exam about which concepts really struck them. And ageism is so frequently mentioned because they hadn't thought about it. So obviously, I want to keep doing that. I have a memoir about travel. I've done a lot of travel and I love to travel. And I have this memoir about a particular trip my husband and I took in 1984. And my agent was like, I can't sell that. Who wants to read about your summer vacation? So I need to tear it apart and put it back together again around thematically oriented essays. And that's a challenge. I don't know if I'll be able to do it or not, but I'm looking forward to giving that a shot. And I'm actually working on a big intellectual history of my field, which has been really fun. I'm interviewing a lot of people, many of them in their 70s and early 80s, about the founding of media studies, because back in the 1950s and 60s, the notion that any self-respecting academic would study the mass media, it was completely, beneath contempt. I mean, why would you study an industry and content featuring, my favorite Martian and, a Mr. Ed, a talking horse, all of this stuff. But my generation of scholars thought that if 40 million people were watching something the same night at the same time, it was important to figure out what messages were in those broadcasts, what was going on in the news. Why were we all seduced by Glamour magazine, for example? So it's been really fun and interesting to see what the deep concerns were of people who started media studies and what their concerns about the media were. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Oh, that's fun. Oh,
yeah, it is
really
fun.
good.
It's unfinished business. I hope I get to finish it.
Yeah, I do too. Oh, Susan, this has been fantastic. If somebody wanted to get in touch with you just because they absolutely have to know more about something or whatever, what's the easiest way to do that?
I have a website. It's susanjdouglas.com. Pretty straightforward, all lowercase. And anytime I get a web inquiry, I respond to it.
Great. Thank you. So that's our time today. Please join us again. You can find out about Prime Spark at www.primesparkwomen.com. Thank you so much to my guest, Susan Douglas. It's been such a joy talking to her. And don't forget, you can find out about her at Susan J. Douglas, SusanJdouglas.com. Come back again. See us again. Thank you for being here today. Spread tolerance and love. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on Prime Spark. With each episode, Sarah Hart brings you conversations that inspire, celebrate, and empower women over 55. If you would like to listen to or download other episodes about remarkable, experienced women, go to ewnpodcastnetwork.com. This podcast is also available at Spotify, Apple Podcast, and most other major podcast sites. The second women's revolution is here, and we hope that you use the insights you've gained here to fuel the spark that will ignite your way forward, illuminate your path, and reflect your gifts in the world.
Have you ever asked yourself this question? Why is it so hard to make a buck? I know I have. Hi, I'm Sandra Yancey, founder and CEO of eWomen Network. What I have discovered after going from the brink of bankruptcy to running a multi-million-dollar award-winning business is this. You can't build $1 million dream hanging around minimum wage mindsets. My mission is 1 million women entrepreneurs generating $1 million in annual revenue. So here's what I've done. I've created the mother of all entrepreneur success programs that you can access online on your time. It's called Monetize Me Now. It's a 7-module online course that is 100% my success formula, covering mindset, mission, management, motivation, marketing, and measure. Come on, take my hand and I'll show you the way to learn to earn flowing revenue for your business. Visit monetizemenow.com for details. Calling all speakers, eWomen Network has speaking engagements all over North America that must be filled. Are you a gifted messenger, author, expert, or successful entrepreneur that can help women entrepreneurs grow their businesses? Our mission is to help 1 million fulfilled women each achieve $1 million in annual revenue. If you're a speaker that can help women prosper, go to eWomenNetwork.com and sign up as a pro member of our Speakers Network. That's eWomenNetwork.com. Thanks for listening. This is the EWN Podcast Network.